Empty chairs, a forgotten life, a funeral where nobody came. When young reporter Zach Harmon sits alone in a funeral parlor for a woman named Edith Blackwood, he can't help but wonder how someone could live for 87 years and leave no mark on the world. No family, no friends, not even a neighbor to say goodbye. But as rain taps against the windows like impatient fingers, Zach makes a decision. Everyone deserves to have their story told, even those who tried to hide it. What he doesn't realize is that by asking his first question about the mysterious librarian, he's pulling on a thread that will unravel decades of carefully guarded secrets, powerful enemies, and a truth so dangerous that someone was willing to abandon everything to keep it hidden. Some stories don't want to be told, but this one needs to be. The funeral home sat quiet on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Water streaked down the windows like tears, making the world outside blur into patches of gray and green. Inside, rows of empty chairs faced a simple wooden casket. Only 3 flower arrangements surrounded it, all from the funeral home itself. White lilies, pale roses, and a small bunch of forget-me-nots that seemed to ask a sad question no one was there to answer. Marlene Jenkins checked her watch again. The plastic band pinched her wrist as she frowned at the time. 15 minutes late, she whispered to her assistant. Tomas? I don't think anyone is coming. Tomas nodded, his young face showing the special kind of sadness that came from watching a life end with no one to mark its passing. He glanced at the small framed photo beside the casket, an elderly woman with silver hair and tired eyes that seemed to look past the camera to somewhere far away. Miss Blackwood lived in the same apartment for over 40 years, Marlene said, smoothing her dark skirt. You'd think someone would remember her. Edith Blackwood, 87 years old, found alone in her small apartment on Pine Street after. The mail carrier noticed letters piling up. The landlord used his key when no one answered his knocks. 3 days had passed since her heart had quietly stopped, while she sat in her reading chair, book still open on her lap. Rain tapped harder against the windows as if trying to get inside. The funeral home's clock ticked loudly in the silence. Maybe she has family coming from out of town, Thomas suggested. The weather is bad today. Marlene shook her head. The police couldn't find any family. No address book. No emergency contacts. No names in her will except the library she donated her books to. That's so sad, Tomas said. This happens sometimes, Marlene replied, her voice gentle from years of practice. Some folks just outlive everyone who knew them, or they keep to themselves so much that no one notices when they're gone. The hands of the clock moved slowly. 20 minutes late. 25. The room remained empty except for the 2 funeral home workers and the body of a woman no one had come to mourn. I guess we should begin anyway, Marlene sighed, picking up her small black folder with the simple service notes. Just then, the front door creaked open. Both Marlene and Thomas turned, hope lifting their expressions. A young man stepped inside, shaking rain from his dark hair. His blue jacket was soaked at the shoulders, and he carried a small notebook in one hand. He looked around the empty room with surprise, then uncertainty. Is this Edith Blackwood's funeral? He asked, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. Marlene rushed forward. Yes, it is. Are you family? The young man shook his head. No. My name is Zach Harmon. I'm a reporter for the Pine Street Press. He showed them his press badge, then looked embarrassed. I heard no one was coming, and it didn't seem right. No one should leave the world with an empty room. Tomas pulled out a chair in the front row. and Zack sat down awkwardly. Water dripped from his jacket onto the carpeted floor. He was the only guest at a funeral for a woman he had never met. Marlene took her place at the small podium. She cleared her throat and began to speak about a stranger. "We are gathered here today to remember Edith Blackwood," she said. Her practiced words sounded hollow in the nearly empty room. Edith was born in 1938 in... Marlene paused, checking her notes with a frown. Actually, her birth records only show the year, not the place. She continued with the few facts they knew. Edith worked as a librarian at the Millers Creek Public Library for 43 years. She never married and had no children. She is survived by... Marlene's voice faltered. She is survived by no known relatives. As the simple words echoed through the empty room, Zack felt something strange stir inside him. What kind of life had Edith Blackwood lived? How could someone exist for 87 years and leave so little mark on the world? Everyone touched someone's life, didn't they? Rain continued to fall outside, and the clock ticked forward. In the quiet of the funeral home, Zack Harmon made a decision. Edith Blackwood deserved more than this empty room, more than these few impersonal words. She deserved to have her story told. He just had to find it first. The next morning, Zack couldn't shake the image of Edith's empty funeral from his mind. Rain still pattered against his apartment window, but lighter now, like distant fingers tapping. He sat at his small kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold. "You look like you didn't sleep," his roommate Penny said, grabbing a yogurt from the fridge. Her curly red hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore her hospital scrubs already. Was that funeral really that bad? It wasn't bad. It was... Zack searched for the right word. Empty. Just me, the funeral director, and her assistant. No one else came. Penny frowned. That's sad, but it happens. Especially with really old people. But that's just it, Zack said, pushing his coffee mug away. Everyone leaves a mark somehow. Nobody just exists for 87 years without touching anyone's life. Maybe she was just a private person. Penny shrugged, grabbing her keys. Not everyone wants a big send-off. But Zack wasn't satisfied. His editor had only assigned him to write a simple 3-paragraph obituary, the kind they ran for people when no family submitted one. But something about Edith's story pulled at him like an invisible thread. After Penny left for her nursing shift, Zack showered and dressed quickly. The rain had stopped by the time he walked the 6 blocks to the Millers Creek Public Library. The old brick building stood 3 stories tall, with wide windows and green ivy climbing one wall. Inside, Zack approached the front desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair was checking in returned books. "Excuse me," he said, showing his press badge. "I'm Zack Harmon from the Pine Street Press. I'm writing about Edith Blackwood. I understand she worked here for many years?" The woman looked up with surprise. "Edith? Yes, I heard she passed. I'm Mrs. Delgado, the head librarian now." She set down the book in her hands. "Edith worked here until about 15 years ago. She's the one who trained me, actually." "Did you know her well?" "Not really, though we worked together for 7 years." Mrs. Delgado's forehead creased. "Edith was, well, she was very good at her job. Always on time. Always organized. But she kept to herself mostly." "Did she have any friends here? Anyone close to her?" Zack pulled out his small notebook. Mrs. Delgado thought for a moment. "Not that I recall. She was efficient, polite, but distant. She never came to staff parties or joined us for lunch." She paused, eyes growing thoughtful. "Now that I think about it, She always seemed afraid of something. Afraid? Of what? Zach's pen stopped moving. I don't know. She would get nervous when strangers came asking for her. Once, she hid in the back room when a man came looking for her. Mrs. Delgado frowned. I always wondered if she was running from something. This piqued Zach's curiosity even more. Do you remember anything about this man? It was so long ago. Well dressed, I remember that. Expensive watch. Like a businessman. Mrs. Delgado shook her head. She never explained, and I didn't ask. Edith valued her privacy. From the library, Zach went to the town records office. The clerk helped him search through old files, but they found little. Edith had moved to Miller's Creek in 1975. Before that, there was no record of her in their system. That's not unusual, the clerk explained. Our digital records only go back to the 60s, and even those are spotty. But something didn't add up. No birth certificate, no school records, no previous employment history. It was like Edith Blackwood hadn't existed before 1975. By mid-afternoon, Zach stood outside Edith's apartment building. It was a plain three-story structure with faded red bricks and narrow windows. Nothing special, but clean and well-kept. The landlord, Mr. Fenton, met him in the lobby. He was a short man with bushy eyebrows who jingled keys nervously. I read your paper, Mr. Fenton said. Saw you were at the funeral. Only one who went, huh? Yes, sir. I'm hoping to write more about Miss Blackwood than just an obituary. Would it be possible to see her apartment before it's cleared out? Mr. Fenton hesitated. Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt. Nothing valuable in there anyway. Been meaning to clean it out this week. Edith's apartment was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. Inside, Zach was struck by how sparse it was. A small sofa, a reading chair with a side table, bookshelves with neat rows of mostly library books. The kitchen was tidy, with a single plate, bowl, and cup drying on the rack. She lived here 42 years, Mr. Fenton said. Never late with rent. Never complained. Perfect tenant. Zach moved slowly through the apartment. No family photos, no souvenirs from trips, no letters saved in drawers. The bedroom was just as plain. A neatly made single bed, a dresser with carefully folded clothes, a small desk with nothing on it. Mind if I look around a bit more? Zach asked. Sure, but not much to see. I'll be downstairs if you need me. Alone in the quiet apartment, Zach felt like a detective. He checked the closet, only practical clothes and a few pairs of shoes. He looked under the bed, nothing but dust. He opened every drawer, neatly organized but lacking anything personal. Just as he was about to give up, Zach noticed something odd about the baseboard near the bedroom window. It seemed to stick out slightly. He knelt and pressed it, feeling it give way. Behind the loose board, he found a small tin box. His heart beating faster, Zach carefully opened it. Inside were 3 items: an old newspaper clipping turned yellow with age, a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, and a worn silver locket on a thin chain. The newspaper was dated May 17, 1975. The headline read, "Local hero missing, feared dead." Zach's breath caught in his throat. He'd found the first piece of Edith Blackwood's hidden story. The next morning, Zach spread his findings across his desk at the newspaper office. Yellow fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he carefully examined each item. The newspaper clipping came from the Oak Ridge Daily, a paper from a small town about 200 miles away. He squinted at the faded print, reading the article again. Local hero missing, feared dead. Vivian Mercer, 28, the nurse who bravely rescued 3 children from the Pinewood apartment fire last week, has been reported missing. Mercer failed to report for her hospital shift on Tuesday and has not been seen since Monday evening. Her car was found abandoned near Crescent Lake. Authorities fear foul play may be involved. Below was a grainy photo of a young woman with dark hair and a determined smile. The same woman who appeared in the photograph Zach had found. The one holding a baby. He turned the photo over again. Written in faded blue ink were the words, "My greatest joy and deepest regret." "This doesn't make sense," Zach muttered, running a hand through his hair. "What does this have to do with Edith?" His co-worker, Lucia, rolled her chair over from the next desk. With bright eyes and perpetually ink-stained fingers, she was always curious about everyone's stories. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "I thought you were just doing an obituary for that woman whose funeral you went to." I am, but there's something strange about her." Zach showed Lucia the items. These were hidden in her apartment. And look at this date, May 1975. That's when Edith Blackwood first appeared in Miller's Creek, according to town records. "Maybe they were friends," Lucia suggested. "Maybe this Vivian person was important to her." "Maybe," Zach said, opening the silver locket. Inside was a tiny lock of baby hair, light brown and impossibly soft. But why hide these things? And why? No record of Edith before 1975? Lucia's eyes widened. "You think Edith Blackwood was actually Vivian Mercer? That she changed her identity?" "It's possible," Zach said. "But why? And what happened to the baby?" That afternoon, Zach drove his aging blue Honda to Oak Ridge. The town was slightly bigger than Miller's Creek, with a small downtown area and sprawling neighborhoods. The Oak Ridge Daily newspaper office was housed in a brick building with large windows. Inside, Zach introduced himself to the receptionist. "I'm doing research on a story from 1975. Is there anyone here who might have worked at the paperback?" "Then," the receptionist smiled, "you'll want to talk to Gerald. He's been here forever. Claims he'll die at his desk someday." Gerald turned out to be a thin man in his 70s with thick glasses and suspenders. His desk was cluttered with decades of journalistic debris, old notepads, press badges from various events, and coffee mugs with faded logos. Vivian Mercer? Gerald's bushy eyebrows shot up when Zach mentioned the name. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Tragic story. Beautiful young woman. Single mother. Worked night shifts at the hospital to support her baby daughter." "What happened to her?" Zach asked, taking notes. Gerald's expression darkened. "Nobody knows for sure, but there were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That she knew something she shouldn't. That the fire wasn't an accident." Gerald helped Zach search through the paper's archives. They found several articles about the Pinewood apartment fire. The building had housed mostly working-class families. The fire had started late at night, and Vivian, who lived in the building, had rushed in and saved 3 children who were trapped in an apartment when their babysitter panicked and ran out. The youngest kid she saved was Marcus Whitfield, Gerald said, pointing to a follow-up article. Son of Harold Whitfield, the richest man in town. He owned the lumber mill, the shopping center, and half the rental properties, including the Pinewood. Apartments. Zach noticed something else, a small article dated a week before the fire. Whitfield Enterprises under investigation for fraud. "Yeah, there was a big scandal brewing," Gerald nodded. "Harold Whitfield was cooking the books. The Ravrier state was investigating him, but after the fire, the investigation mysteriously disappeared." "Was there a connection?" Gerald shrugged. "Hard to say, but right after Vivian vanished, the investigation was dropped. And the apartments? They were overinsured. Whitfield made a fortune from that fire. Zach felt a chill race down his spine. You think Vivian witnessed something? That she had to run because of what she knew? It would explain why she disappeared, and why no body was ever found. Gerald leaned closer. Here's something else. The babysitter who left those kids? She worked for Whitfield's company. After the fire, she suddenly had a new car and a nice apartment. As the pieces began fitting together, Zach had one more question. The baby in the photo. What happened to Vivian's daughter? Gerald scratched his chin. That's another strange thing. After Vivian disappeared, Harold Whitfield's wife suddenly had a baby girl. They claimed she'd been pregnant, but nobody had noticed. The timing was convenient. Zach thanked Gerald and left with copies of the articles. Driving back to Miller's Creek, his mind raced. Had Edith Blackwood been Vivian Mercer? Had she fled Oak Ridge and started a new life, leaving her baby behind? Was that why she'd lived such a solitary existence, always afraid of being discovered? And if Harold Whitfield had been behind it all, what had happened to him? And to the baby? The answer to the first question came quickly. Back at his apartment that evening, Zach searched online news archives and discovered Harold Whitfield had died just 3 years ago at the age of 84. His obituary painted him as a pillar of the community. Successful businessman, generous donor to local charities, loving father, father to one son, Marcus Whitfield. Zach stared at the screen. The obituary mentioned Marcus as the son he saved from a tragic fire. There was no mention of a daughter. The photo showed an older man with sharp eyes and a forced smile. Beside him stood his son, now a middle-aged man with the same cold eyes. Marcus had taken over Whitfield Enterprises after his father's retirement and had expanded it into a regional business empire. Using the photo he'd found in Edith's apartment, Zach carefully compared the faces. The young woman, Vivian, had a distinctive chin and unusual eyebrows that arched high at the outer edges. Looking at photos of Edith Blackwood from library events over the years, he could see the same features, softened by age. Edith Blackwood and Vivian Mercer were the same, soon. But what had made her flee and change her identity? The next morning, Zach visited Mrs. Delgado at the library again. Did Edith ever mention Oak Ridge? Or someone named Harold Whitfield? He asked. Mrs. Delgado's face paled. How did you know about that? About what? The letter. Mrs. Delgado lowered her voice, though the library was nearly empty. She received a letter once, about 10 years ago. I remember because she became very upset. She took the rest of the day off, the only time she ever did that in all the years. I knew her. When she came back the next day, she looked like she hadn't slept. Do you remember anything about the letter? Just that it had a company logo on it. Whitfield Enterprises, I think. Mrs. Delgado frowned. I only saw it for a moment when I brought in the mail. Edith grabbed it from me so quickly. I always wondered what it was about. Zach made a few calls, tracking down Harold Whitfield's former secretary, a woman named Judith Barnes, who now lived in a retirement community in the next county. He drove there that afternoon. Judith was in her 70s, with perfectly styled silver hair and bright red lipstick. She welcomed Zach into her small apartment with suspicious eyes. I don't talk about the Whitfields anymore, she said, when he explained why he'd come. 40 years as Harold's secretary taught me one thing. Keep your mouth shut if you want to stay healthy. Harold is dead, Zach reminded her gently. But Marcus isn't. Judith's lips thinned. The apple didn't fall far from that tree. It took more convincing, but finally, over cups of tea, Judith revealed a shocking truth. Mr. Whitfield was obsessed with finding that nurse. He hired private investigators for years. But why? She saved his son's life. Judith lowered her voice, even though they were alone. Because she overheard him that night, talking about how he had ordered the fire to destroy evidence. He planned to collect the insurance money and eliminate records of his fraud at the same time. He never expected anyone to be in the building so late. So Vivian, Edith, was a witness to his crime? Yes, and there's more. Judith's fingers trembled around her teacup. She claimed the baby was his, from an affair they'd had. He denied it, of course. Zach's heart raced. The baby in the photograph, that was Harold's child? Judith nodded. Vivian threatened to tell his wife, to go public with it all. Then suddenly, she disappeared. Harold told everyone she must have drowned herself in the lake where they found her car. But there was no body. Exactly. Judith's eyes held decades of unspoken suspicions. Then a few months later, when the scandal died down, Harold announced that Marcus would get a little sister. The adoption was very private, very quick. No one asked questions. So Marcus Whitfield isn't. Marcus is Harold's biological son, yes. But the daughter, Judith shook her head. She died in college. Car accident. Or so they said. On the drive back to Miller's Creek, Zach's mind spun with possibilities. If this was true, Marcus Whitfield, the baby in the photograph, was Edith's son, the child she had left behind when she fled for her life. But something didn't add up. Judith had said Harold's daughter died in college. But Gerald had talked about Harold suddenly having a baby girl after Vivian disappeared. 2 different children? Or another lie in a tangle of deceptions? Zach's article about Edith Blackwood's true identity was published the following Sunday. His editor had been skeptical at first, but the evidence was compelling. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Hero nurse lived in hiding for decades. The headlines read, Zach included everything. How Vivian, Mercer had saved 3 children from a fire set by a corrupt businessman. How she'd fled when her life was threatened, abandoning her own baby to keep him safe, and how she'd lived in hiding as Edith Blackwood for over 40 years. The town of Miller's Creek buzzed with the news. People who had checked out books from Edith for decades now realized they had never truly known her. Former library patrons called the newspaper office, sharing small memories. How Edith always remembered their children's birthdays with book recommendations. How she would slip bookmarks into returns with encouraging notes for those going through hard times. How she kept her distance but still touched lives in quiet ways. 3 days after the article was published, Zach received a call from Marcus Whitfield's office, requesting a meeting. He wants to sue us, his editor predicted grimly. Or worse, Lucia added, eyes wide, if his father was willing to kill to keep his secrets. Nervous but determined, Zach arrived at the towering Whitfield Enterprises building the next morning. The receptionist led him to an elevator that took him to the top floor. Marcus, a stern-looking man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, waited in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Your article has caused quite a stir, Mr. Harmon, Marcus said coldly, not offering to shake hands. It's the truth, Zach replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I have evidence. I know, Marcus said, his expression softening unexpectedly. He gestured to a chair. That's why I wanted to meet you. Zach sat, confused by the change in tone. I knew Edith Blackwood was my birth mother, Marcus continued. Zach stared in shock. You knew? Marcus nodded, moving to look out the window. I found out 10 years ago. My father confessed everything on his deathbed. I tracked her down, sent her a letter. I wanted to meet her, but she never responded. She was afraid, Zach explained. She'd been running for so long. I know that now, Marcus said, his voice breaking. That's why I'm calling a press conference tomorrow. I'm going to publicly acknowledge what my father did and clear her name. And, he paused, I'm holding a proper memorial service for her. I think many people will want to come now. 2 weeks later, the funeral home was filled to capacity. Dozens of reporters, former library patrons, and citizens from both Millers Creek and Oak Ridge came to honor the woman they now knew as both Edith Blackwood and Vivian Mercer. The simple casket now had photographs showing her at different ages, including the picture of her holding baby Marcus. Flowers covered every surface, not from the funeral home this time, but from people whose lives she had touched, often without them even knowing her true story. Marcus Whitfield stood at the podium, tears in his eyes. My mother was the bravest person I never knew, he began. She sacrificed everything, including raising her own child, to escape a dangerous man and protect others. She lived a quiet life of service, enriching the minds of everyone in this community through books and kindness. As the service ended, and people placed flowers on Edith's newly inscribed grave, Zach stood back, watching. The headstone now read, Vivian Edith Mercer, with both her birth and death dates. Marcus approached him, holding a small box. I wanted you to have this, Marcus said, handing Zach the silver locket. Without you, I'd never have known the truth about my mother. Zach accepted the locket, but noticed something off about Marcus's expression. A subtle tightness around his eyes, a too perfect sadness. That night, reviewing his notes, Zach realized he'd missed something important. The timeline didn't make sense. Harold Whitfield had died 3 years ago, but the letter that had upset Edith had come 10 years ago. Marcus claimed his father had confessed on his deathbed, but the letter predated that by 7 years. And the handwriting on the photograph, my greatest joy and deepest regret, he'd seen it somewhere else, on a signature line of a document in Marcus's office. With a chill, Zach suddenly understood. Marcus had known about his mother long before his father's deathbed confession. In fact, he'd known for decades. The real question was, why had he waited until after her death to acknowledge her? And what was in that letter that had frightened Edith so badly 10 years ago? As Zach opened the locket again, a tiny slip of paper fell out that he hadn't noticed before. Unfolding it carefully, he read 6 words that made his blood run cold. Like father, like son, stay hidden. The true story of Edith Blackwood was far from over. That was the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed this emotional journey about secrets, sacrifice, and the unexpected connections that bind us together. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know which part of the world this story has reached. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more intriguing narratives just like this one. Your support helps create more engaging content, like what you just heard. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Spreading these stories not only entertains, but also promotes kindness and awareness of how complex human lives can be. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon.